Good evening. I hope you are all doing fine. It is a pleasure to be back finally. Um, I can already see that there are people tuned in. Um, Happy that people have tuned in early. It's been a while since since we have done this, and I am very happy that we get to do this. Um, so welcome everyone. Um, Today we have a very interesting topic to discuss. Today is the African Day. It is the 25th of May, and several churches, several organizations have got together on this day and have celebrated Africa in different ways. And I have invited two guests. I will introduce them. Um, Shortly after this. One of them has already connected. I see that he's in the waiting room. I'll let him join us in a while, but we're just gonna wait a little bit. While we do that, I would love to interact with those who are already connecting. Let me try and open the chat section. I'm using a new software for streaming that I have never used before. Actually, I'm not even sure. Let me double check if everyone can see me. Um, Let me see. Can you all hear me? Can you see me? Can someone write in the comments if you can see me? Am I visible? Am I visible? Let me know. Just write in the comment section. Am I audible? Uh, am I visible? Kindly write for me in the comment section. Okay, I'm visible. That's good to know. That's wonderful. Um, could you write where you're watching from or where you're following us from if you've already connected? I already see that Dr. Watson Mbiriri is available. I will let him in a while. For now, I want to play a video. The topic we are going to discuss today, I have written a book on this topic, and the book is available. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Kindle. It's available on so many platforms. You can just visit aiashabc.org, and you will be able to see in how many formats the book is available. And if you are interested, you can order one through Amazon or any other way available on the website. So I'm going to play a video, and this video is a video that explains the focus of the book that I have written on African traditional religion and the Bible. It's comparative. I try to answer several questions. There's a recent Pan African movement, a very militant one, suggesting that we should forsake Christianity. We should forsake the Bible, and that the Bible is a European tool to enslave Africans. And then I've also dealt with issues of Africa being the cradle of civilization. There are a lot of similarities between African traditional religion and the Bible. And in the book, I try to give an answer as to why is that? Why do we find a lot of similarities? So I'm going to play a video while we wait for the guests to connect, and while we wait for everybody else to join, while we give more time for them to join. Yeah, before I proceed to that, let me just make sure again that on Facebook I'm visible. Okay, wonderful. I am visible. So let me close the window. Okay, I'm going to proceed to play the video. African traditional religion and the Bible possess concepts on the origin of life that have a deeply rooted sociological impact in Africa, but their shared commonalities are erroneously being interpreted by a religious Pan-Africanism that has raised serious accusations against the Bible. Such antagonism is a retaliation to slavery, colonization, and racist missionary activities in Africa. As a result, so many are asking if we should forsake Christianity and return to African traditional religions. Is the Bible a European invention to enslave Africans? Is it hostile to African religions? Is Africa really the cradle of civilization? Are Africans truly the first inventors? Several answers have been given, but most have been doubtful, dangerous, and disappointing. They have only contributed to more ignorance and agnosticism on the subject matter. I believe it is because some are misinformed, others are uninformed, and many informed individuals misinterpret and misapply credible information. Conversely, some are correctly dealing with this issue. This last group of informed and balanced individuals is not my primary focus. My primary focus in this book is to enlighten the misinformed and challenge several of the extreme views on the subject matter that continue to be promoted, such as the notion that the Bible and Christianity should be made African or forsaken. Finally, the reason why I have entitled this book, The Biblical Creator Dressed in African Attire, and why the last chapter is a call for Africans to return to their roots, can only be fully grasped after one embarks on the journey of reading the book. In so doing, you join me in a historical adventure, because when I began, I did so without knowing where it would take me or what I would find. Each chapter is a step I took forward, and at the end, I realized that the path that I had undertaken led me to the beginning of the Bible. All right, so that's the video, which explains the objective of the book that I have written. And it is available, as I mentioned, on my website, aiashabc.org. And if you visit the website, you will be able to read the book, order the book. All right, so for today, I have added Dr. Watson Mbiriri. Let me, I think he's trying to connect. Dr. Watson, can you hear me?
I can hear you, my brother, loud and clear. How are you doing?
By God's grace, all is well. How's it? I hope you had a happy Sabbath.
It was a blessed one, and it was a celebration of Africa Day in a unique Adventist way. I hope to put on my video very shortly, but for now, I'm kind of like in the dark.
Okay, that is fine. But you can hear me, right?
I can hear you loud and clear, and I hope everyone who's connected in can also hear my voice from Harare.
Okay,
Greetings
that's
to everyone.
wonderful, wonderful. So, do you want us to give you more time? Because we can give you more time so that you can set up your camera.
For the sake of people who have already joined, I hope people don't mind that we can start like this, but shortly I'll be settled.
Oh no, that's fine.
so
That's
that
fine.
we don't keep people waiting longer.
Okay. Okay. I want to test out something. I am opening Facebook just to double check. I just want to double check that they can hear me and you clearly. Okay, wonderful.
Okay,
Let
that's
me
okay.
That's fine. I'm gonna just stay on. I am going to ask you, actually, let me see. Add to left. Wonderful. Can you say something?
Oh yes, something is a very good thing to say. So yes, and I hope we've got people joining in from across the continent and beyond. I have a number of friends who promised that they would be joining in, and if they are, hello, 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 hello.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So we can hear you loud and clear. We will move on. I know people can hear. So the topic for today's discussion is the OT and African traditional religion. And I want to just quickly, I was planning to read the bio, both of your bios at the same time, but I will just read yours. Um, just give me a second. Um, I have just started using this app, which is a good app, but let me just quickly open. Um, okay, I'm having trouble finding it. Let me give you all the simple presentation. And trust me, there's a lot more to present about Dr. Watson Biriri. Dr. Watson Biriri is an Old Testament scholar. Um, he's an ordained pastor for very long. I met him in the Philippines. Vast experience with church administration, and also as yes, church administration. As a scholar, I met him in the Philippines, and he is someone who has always showed interest in African traditional religions. And when I thought about discussing this topic, I thought of bringing him on board, and I am happy that he accepted to take part in this discussion. Now, usually when I am invited to participate in podcasts and interviews, there is a way I would love people to start, which is for them to ask me what I think is how do I put it? What do I wish? What's on the top of my mind when I received this topic? Oftentimes, I participate in certain discussions where I am asked questions of things that I don't feel are, how do I put this, are extremely important to share when we discuss a topic like this. So I want to ask Dr. Watson, um, what is the information you have concerning OT and African traditional religion that you would like to address first, or that you would like to share first? Because sometimes the way I may ask certain questions, it may leave out something that you think is really important whenever people discuss this topic or in light of this topic. And so I want to give you the opportunity as we begin this discussion, this interview, because I'll be interviewing you. Um, and I'll be probably input, but mostly I just want to hear from you and the other guest. What is the one thing that you, the way you would like us to begin, something that you would like to share, and make sure that uh, by the time we end, you want to make sure that that thing was said. Is there anything that you would like us to begin with before I begin to ask questions?
Oh yes, thank you so much. I am glad to have the opportunity to share, and I couldn't agree more with your opening remarks and what you shared in the video. As you were talking about, sometimes kind of like a Renaissance movement that we find sometimes, where people are talking about the need perhaps to get rid, as it were, of the Bible, and saying that it's a Eurocentric thing, and everything like that. It's a colonial project, and it doesn't help our situation much. I think that is a, a typical expression of total misunderstanding of what it is all about when we're talking about the Bible. It is, I think it's unfortunate. That's the way I would put it, that it is an unfortunate, situation when we do say something like that. So when we come to the Bible, we do not only find parallels, between the Bible and the. I'm setting myself up here. We
Yes,
do not
that's
only
fine.
find parallels between the Bible and the Old Testament. I mean, the African traditional religion and the Old Testament. But those parallels are very important in helping us appreciate the Bible much better. Sometimes it's a misunderstanding of both the Bible and African traditional religion, which then puts us in situations where we pit these two against each other and result in the rejection of the Bible
Okay.
by some people and so on. I think it is so much unfortunate. And so quickly, a rundown of some of the themes that I believe are so important or so crucial for the subject that we are discussing tonight are things like when we look at the Bible and in African traditional religions, we can talk about ATR in plural, because there are different expressions of African traditional religions across the continent.
Okay.
And so we find, for example, a number of things. Number one, the very concept of the existence of God. The Old Testament does not argue for the existence of God. The existence of God is assumed. And so there's no verse that tries to prove that God exists. The Old Testament just begins by saying, in the beginning, God created.
Okay.
The existence of God is taken as a given, that He is there, He exists, which is something that you also find when you come into African traditional religions. The existence of God in Africa is not something that is that there is no platform to discuss whether God exists or He doesn't. It
Mm.
is assumed, it is a given that God exists. And then so that is the theology part. And then this God acts in time and space and history, and He has acted. And the most important act is that He created or brought the world into existence. So the aspect of creation, which is pivotal for the whole Old Testament and the entire Bible,
Mm.
the act of creation is an act that is also expressed in African traditional religions in a number of ways. For example, through attributive names, the names that are given to God in different languages across the African continent. For example, in my language, Shona, in Zimbabwe, we call God Musikavanu, the creator of human beings. We
Okay.
call him Muumba Pasi, the one who molded the earth.
Okay.
We call him Samasimba, which means Almighty. And these are attributive names which are giving us. So we've got so many of those attributive names which have got so many correspondences and parallels with what the Old Testament tells us about God. So the issue of creation. Then you could also come even to the issues to do with the existence of spirits, because African traditional religions are animistic religions, which means there's strong belief in the existence of spirits.
Okay.
And when you come into the Old Testament, you find so much mention of different spirits, right? Beginning with the Holy Spirit or the Spirit of God, and so on. So we can talk about Sabbath, which is also very common in some African traditional religions. We can talk about sacred spaces and times.
Mm.
Sacred spaces and times. So there's all these correspondences that we find between the Old Testament and African traditional religions. And I think an understanding of African traditional religions can actually be very helpful for one to access and better appreciate and appropriate what God reveals to us in the Old Testament about Himself and His acts in history.
Wow, that's a beautiful way to start. There's a lot
Mhm.
you've mentioned. I've already created an outline for the discussion based on the things you have mentioned. Um,
Mhm.
and initially, I want us to go back. You mentioned that in referring to African traditional religion, you said that there's an element of plurality. Some people refer to they call it African traditional religion and some African
Mhm.
traditional religions. Um,
Mhm.
and you said that because we see differences in the religions. Is that, did I hear correctly?
Yes, you heard me correctly. And I think it would be good to talk of religions. These are like denominations, as it were. Well, yeah, these are like yeah, African traditional religions. Okay, yeah, that's quite an interesting way to look at it. But maybe if I to compare to denominations, those would be different expressions of the same religion, which is, let's say, Christianity. So I think it's more like that. That
Okay.
African traditional religion, the key elements or tenets of it seem to be common, the overall tenets of it, but there are differences in how it expresses and manifests in different places. So it would maybe, I think it's more helpful to think of them as denominations of the same religion.
Okay.
Um, but then sometimes we talk of them in the plural as religions. But probably it's more accurate to really think of them as denominations within the African traditional religion.
No, I appreciate the word denominations because, after I wrote the book, there are several people who saw how I use the terminology because I referred it as African traditional religions because I noticed that they are fundamental similarities, but they are also fundamental differences, but they seem few. And so I was hesitant to refer it as African traditional religion. And actually, yesterday, I was saying to myself, maybe I should revise in the second edition and keep uh, and write African traditional religion. Maybe I got this wrong, and I was just trying to think of ways of maintaining it and listening to that criticism. I'm happy we began this discussion this way.
Yeah, you could tell that I was also listening to myself even as I was trying to respond to your question,
Yes, yes.
and so on. Yeah, but I think thinking of denominations is a much more accurate way to try and express this, whether to say, is it a religion or is it religions?
Hmm.
I think there are enough fundamental differences, I mean, similarities or commonalities that we can really talk of this as a religion, but it has different expressions in different contexts. So I would be persuaded to think of it more as a religion that has got different denominations, the way we see in Christianity, even in Islam, with the Shia and the Sunni
Okay.
expressions of the same religion.
Okay. I want to explore this a little bit more, and I just want to throw some examples, and I want your reaction on it. For example,
Uh,
Leza is seen, Leza or some other creator, but in the context of Africa, he's seen as a
mhm,
self-creating deity. And then we also come across several concepts of the creator not always existing, being eternal, not existing through the initiative of another deity, and not even creating himself. What else? What else? What else? What other example can I give? Okay, but beginning with this, is this enough to establish that this is an indication of different religions? For example, I've also come across concepts where the creator is seen as the originator of both evil and good. And then in some scenarios, it is more animistic than it is monotheistic. And then you clearly, there seems to be a sense of polytheism, where there's a concept of two creators seen as supreme, where you have, for example, a male creator and a female creator. All these differences, is it sufficient to say that these are indications? Okay, they believe in the supernatural, but because they think differently about the supernatural, then these are indications of different religions. Is what you think of that?
Okay, that's an interesting one. So uh, it could be an expression of maybe modifications that could have taken place over time in
Okay.
different places. Yes, but I think the concept or the root, the motif of a supreme being who is a creator, um, is somewhat contained even in these different expressions that we find. So yeah, I would still be persuaded to think that I think it's more helpful to think of this as a religion that has got different expressions or denominations,
Okay.
in spite of the seemingly significant differences like those.
Okay.
Um, yes,
I
yes,
see.
that's right.
I see. We have a third person joining the
Y-
interview.
y- that's right. Trying to stand in for Dr. Choto. Yeah, Dr. Choto has been having struggled joining on this platform.
All right, that's fine. You had also mentioned that the concept of creation is pivotal in the Bible and in African traditional religion. Um, yes, why? What ramifications does it have? Does this concept have? Why is it so pivotal in both?
uh, Everything stands or falls with creation. It is so fundamental. It is so foundational to everything else, because to begin with, the concept that there is a creator has to do with the issue of basically like cosmic order, that there is order and accountability and responsibility that we have as creatures to this supreme being or to God, to the creator. So to begin with, there is order, there's accountability. He has his rules, he has his principles by which we ought to abide, which is important now for ordering, let's say, society, how we live and how we interact with each other as human beings, and our spirituality, our orientation and how we relate to this supreme being. Then that goes to our spirituality. And it also goes to how we relate to the world that He created around us.
Okay.
If our relationship with God or if we get to a point where we don't recognize God as creator, what it means is that we become the supreme rule and principle. And so we make our own laws, we make our own and everything like that. It then affects the way we look at the people around us. For
Mm,
example, when you look at in Amos chapter 9, verse number 7, and God is talking there about the Philistines and the people, I mean, of you are talking to the Israelites, and he poses a question to them that are you not just like the Cushites to me? And are you not like the people of, the Philistines and also the Arameans? Okay, that's the other name. So, in other words, God is saying, I created all these people. And he goes even further to say that just like I led you out of Egypt, I also led the Philistines out of Kepha and the Arameans out of Kir. And I created you all, and I superintend over you all. So this then goes to the issue of how we relate to one another.
Okay.
If I get to a point where I believe that God only created Zimbabweans, I'm then going to have a distorted view of people from Angola, because I will not really acknowledge that they are real people. Or if I only believe God created the people in my tribe or in my racial group, So creation is so important in that it permeates, it gets into everything. In terms of, number one, our spirituality, which means our relationship with God, how we relate to God. Are we going to acknowledge him? Are we going to abide by his rules? Are we going to, what place does he play in our lives? Which is why in the Old Testament, you find that the Israelites had many challenges because they were so much bent on worshiping different idols, worshiping Baal, worshiping this and that. A people can never rise above the morality of the God they worship. A people can never rise beyond that, which means if you are worshiping a stone, if you are worshiping a piece of wood, you are already done for. That society easily degenerates into barbarism. Many times the Old Testament prophets are complaining about bloodshed. They are talking about all this immorality, the widows and orphans are being oppressed and so on. Because the moment you worship stones and so on, you can never rise in terms of your morality and ethical conduct above the gods that you worship. So we see it in our world, for example, that when we reject creation and that God created, we then easily move into things like, advocating for abortion, rearranging sexual orientations and things like that, and reorganizing families and saying that, well, I may be this, but I identify as that. Looking at me, I can argue that I look black, but I identify as Irish. Or as Indonesian, or something like that. And we are making these kinds of arguments because the first thing is we have discounted God's creatorship. Once we dislodge that, we are in serious trouble. So the fact that African traditional religions embrace the creatorship of God, you will find that there are things that are being advocated in places where evolution, for example, is celebrated. Darwinian evolution is celebrated. And you can find that Africa is on a collision course with those parts of the world, on a real collision course, because these are not just academic things. They have implications, ramifications in terms of decisions, morality, ethical standards, conduct, and everything like that. That's why you find that even though these things are celebrated in certain capitals around the world, they are a hard sell on the African continent, because it's a continent that believes that there's some God created and he gave a particular order, whether with regards to marriage, that is supposed to be monogamous, it's supposed to be permanent, it's supposed to be heterosexual, all these kind of things deriving from creation, and things like that. So these are the kind of elements that we find. On the element, yes, these are okay. There's something that I thought I needed to clarify, but maybe if someone brings it up, yes, I'll clarify.
All right.
But so creation is very important. Maybe before I finish on this, you look, for example, in the book of Romans, chapter 1, where Paul talks about a people that rejected God's creation. Of course, we are not in the New Testament, Old Testament anymore. It's New Testament. But once we reject the existence of God, it then lists a catalog of evils that come. It's like an avalanche. It's like we have broken a dam wall. It's a torrent of evil that then, or practices and things like that, that then come out of that. The way we treat each other, bombing each other, enslaving and all these kind of things, they come out of a rejection that there's God who created and created people with dignity in his own image. Once we dismiss that, so the moment we lose creation, we have really lost it and we lose so much. It becomes a messy situation all around.
Wow, you've said a lot in a short period of time. There's so much we can pick from what you've mentioned, and there's I believe it's chapter seven in the book I wrote. As you were discussing the elements of creation and the ethical, moral implication it has in human life, if we remove an absolute moral uh, point of reference, it is very interesting that um, there are certain Pan African movements that declare that Africa is the cradle of civilization, and
Mm-hmm.
as they declare that Africa is the cradle of civilization, they use, for example, the writings of Cheka Anta Diop. And
Okay.
Cheka Anta Diop, when he writes his book on the origin of he calls it the human race, but we know that there's only um, the origin of the black race or the Negro race.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
we know that there's no such thing as races. You just have human race. But he had this concept of different races, different types of human beings, instead of only one race, human beings, different complexions, and different cultures. They associated complexions with different races instead of just looking at it as we are all human beings, but we have different complexions and we come from different culture. But his concept of different races and isolating, for example, let's say the black race, is he presented in the last chapter of that book, which is entitled "The Evolution of the Negro Race." And when he begins to
Mm-hmm.
discuss the evolution of the Negro race, he says that we began as Homo sapiens, and anyone who knows the theory of evolution as articulated and modified scientifically through time from 1859, we know that that's Darwinian terminology. So he believes in Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, Homo habilis. And then Charles Darwin, in the Descent of Men, I forgot the edition, but I know it's page 199. He says that human evolution probably began in the continent of Africa, in southern Africa. And then he goes on to argue that we began to move to conquer the world from southern Africa. We went across Africa, and then we moved into Europe, we moved into Asia, Europe, and we went on to conquer the world. And so in his writings, Charles Darwin suggested that Africa is the cradle of civilization from this perspective. And then there are scientists, historians, archaeologists who believe the theory of evolution, and even religious people. And so some people are not aware that this concept of Africa being the cradle of civilization is influenced by Darwinian history of the world, how they perceive the world in terms of evolution. I find it very contradicting because not most, but many of the Pan Africanists argue that Africans were the first to, how do I put this, on Earth. Let me give one example. I'm sure you know PLL Lumumba. He, for example,
Mm-hmm.
on several occasions argued that Africa is the cradle of civilization because when God created Adam and Eve, he used the dust. And then he says, the last time I checked, the dust is either brown or black. Um, and then there are people who will also argue that Genesis 2 um, indicates that the Garden of Eden was in Africa or in Ethiopia. And so they present this concept of Africa being the cradle of civilization. There are other ways, but these two ways. Africans were the first to be created. The Garden of Eden was in Africa. And then evolution, through evolution, we know that we found the first fossils, they say, in Africa, Lucy and them. But these are Pan Africanists using evolutionary principles, evolutionary ideas, but then they also claim to believe in the supernatural. So it's contradictory that you will claim belief in the supernatural, but then you entertain this concept of human beings evolving, Homo sapiens, and moving on from other animals, and finally going on and on and on, and you have human beings. It's a bit like theistic evolution, where you don't know how do I put this? You don't know what to do with evolution, and you want to entertain the concept of God. So you try to find a way to mix the two. So as you were discussing evolution and all of that, and you mentioned that this concept of absolute morality, absolute truth, you need an absolute point of reference who is supreme, who is not created, who is absolutely good, through whom we derive absolute ethical, moral principles. If one is a Pan-Africanist, but yet you adopt these evolutionary principles, it is contradictory. And thank God, in African traditional religion, as you mentioned in the beginning, we have this concept of God, God being eternal, Him being the supreme creator. And so we are able to derive ethical codes and moral codes. And in the absence of this supreme deity who is good, we it's we can't do that. We are like the evolutionists. So this is what came to mind as you were
Mhm.
sharing all of these things. I don't know if you would like to react to this, because I want us to talk briefly about the Sabbath. You mentioned the Sabbath. You said we find it across African traditional religion. So I don't know if you want to react to what I've said, or we can move to the Sabbath thing.
Yes, thank you so much. I think, yeah, what really came to my mind also is that like theistic evolution, where some people want what the Bible says, but they also want, the Darwinian scientific worldview, and they want to marry these two. But in the end, they are rejected both by creationists and also Darwinians, and so on. So maybe some Pan African people would also want to do exactly the same, feeling tickled by the suggestion that human life would have originated in Africa and so on and so on. I honestly haven't applied my mind so much to it because I don't really know if it adds any value,
Yeah.
if to really pursue that kind of thing. But two things. Number one, as you rightly said, from a biological point of view, talking about races among humans, they say it's biological nonsense. There's just one race, and that is the human race. And then, number two, talking about so there's just the human race, and that's it. There's a second point that I wanted to touch on that seems to have eluded me at the moment. Okay, yes, it is the fact that there's a scientific view or position which talks about in our skin tones or pigmentation as human beings, that we've got different skin tones. And they say from a scientific point of view, it is not possible to gain melanin, but it's possible to lose it.
Oh,
Okay. So, yes, it's not possible
wow.
to gain, but you can lose. So, those who don't, we have very little of it, is because it has been lost over time or whatever through the different expressions of the human
Hmm.
genes and so on. But those we have it, so what it basically points to that the first people must have been colored,
Darker. Yeah.
and I think, yeah, must have been colored somehow.
Okay.
We don't know how colored, but I think Ellen White talks about that Adam was ruddy, He was
Yeah.
not, like what
Reddish.
we call
Yeah.
white,
Yeah.
reddish or something like that, and so on. But from a scientific point of view, I've seen material that says that you can't gain, you can only lose
Mm.
it,
Wow.
something like that, and so on and so on. So I think that kind of like points toward some place that could be in or close to Africa, and of course, the when you look at those rivers, but one does may not know whether the courses those rivers are following, like the Euphrates, for
Yeah.
example, the Tigris, and so on, whether the courses they are following today are the same courses they were following at creation, because there was that upheaval that came with the flood during Noah's time,
Mm.
and it could have been so disruptive to
Mm.
the plate tectonics or the face of the earth, the crust, and everything like that. So much that a lot of changes could have happened. So we don't know if they still flow in the same direction that they used to flow before that event, catastrophic event of the flood. Yes, so I think, yeah, we can move on to talk about the Sabbath for sure.
Okay, that's wonderful. Before we move on to the Sabbath, when you mentioned that um, the pigmentation, we lose, we don't gain. Now, if that is true, something came to my mind. Usually, when we think of, just yesterday I heard it, when we think of Kush, and Kush
Hmm.
means the black or the darkened one, something like that. And because of that
Hmm.
description, we associate him to the African continent. Um,
Hmm.
if that is true, um, how do I put it? Then it is not only in the continent we know today as Africa where there were people with darker skin. Um, um, yeah,
Yes, that's true, because uh, well, people might have migrated. I don't know. Yeah, it's
mm,
a very interesting and intriguing thing. But for example, when you look, you would know, maybe as much as I do, that for example, the original people of the Philippines are dark skinned. You would actually mistake them for Africans
yeah, yeah,
until you come maybe very close. That's when
mm,
you can make a distinction and so on. And it's something that actually surprised me. When I
okay,
first learned about that, it really took me by surprise. I was not expecting something like that.
okay,
Of course, going into, for example, the Pacific Ocean, nation islands in the Pacific, we've got, of course, the Micronesian islands, and then we've got the Polynesians, but then we also have the Melanesian ones,
mm,
like Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, and so on. And all those are dark-skinned people. Although they do, like for example, in Papua New Guinea, they have a theory that came from Tanganyika, which is around Tanzania. I mean, from Tanzania, basically. At least the time that I visited in Papua New Guinea, I found this to be a very strong
wow,
element. Then, of course, you've got the Aborigines in Australia as well, who are Melanese as well. So it's quite interesting. And even some, discoveries that have been made in, for example, in Europe, in some, like in Britain and other places, when scientists have, uncovered or taken these skeletons out of the ground or wherever, and some of them preserved because of permafrost. Um, it's quite interesting that they seem to concur that these are dark-skinned people,
okay,
and so on. And there was a big thing over the mummies in Egypt, because there was one scientist in the US who, for the longest time, was begging the whatever team that deals with Egyptology in Egypt, so that they would do tests on the skins to test for melanin, and it became a huge political issue,
oh,
because it was suspected and maybe, let's say, known that these people are dark-skinned people and things like that, and then it becomes quite a big political issue, and it goes on and on. But yeah, there are those all those kind of things. So it seems like they and um, there are studies that have been done. There's one doctor, a lady from the United States, I forget her name at the moment. She did a doctorate, I think, around 1959 in the
Okay.
United States. She was a medical doctor and a psychiatrist. Um, and for the longest time, as long as I remember, her thesis was never disproved, where she was talking about the cause of racial segregation, essentially arguing that it exists because there's the real potential that for people that are of lighter skin, if people were to freely interact in this world without the hindrances and restrictions, those who are light skinned will be wiped out of existence,
Ooh.
because the those who have got a melanin, or I mean more melanin, or this pigmentation, are far more. And so there's a
Oh.
subconscious reaction to this existential threat, which then manifests in segregation and racism as a self-preservation mechanism against the existential threat that comes. And some people then talk about the social situation, let's say, for example, in the United States, where you find that black people are disproportionately represented in the prisons,
Okay.
particularly the black male. And why? Sometimes, maybe, for example, during slavery and during the Jim Crow laws in the United States, people would target and even attack the genitalia of the black man,
Hmm.
and so on and so on. Because and so there are all these explanations. So there is a fantastic doctoral dissertation that was done on that, and a lot of material that came out of that, and very interesting and intriguing, and so on. So yeah, there's quite a lot that goes on into that. But as you said right at the beginning, and as the Bible says in Acts chapter 17, that He created all nations of one blood. Verse 26 and 27. He created all nations of one blood. And so we are all one. The Bible knows only one human race, people created in the image of God, even though we've got different expressions of skin tones and hair, our hair and things like that, which could be explained maybe scientifically.
Awesome. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I'm gonna have to make a certain how do I put take the things you've shared and edit them and break them down. Um you've addressed a lot of things, a lot of important things. I would love to get access to that dissertation. Interesting. Wow, interesting. So the
Mhm.
Sabbath. You mentioned that in African traditional religion there is a concept of the Sabbath. And the first time I heard about this, I don't know if you recall, but we were at IS, we were having a potluck, and Dr. Sibanda was there, you were there, there were a couple of other people, and it was during a potluck. I actually have this in my book when I discuss this concept of the Sabbath in African traditional religion, chapter 4. And but I wasn't sure if you had mentioned it or it was Dr. Sibanda who had mentioned it. I just know that after that conversation, I vowed that one day I'm gonna have to research about this and I'm gonna have to know what this is. It just blew my mind. The idea that Sabbath observance, African traditional religion. So what can you say about it? Because why am I asking this? You spoke about creation, and it's impossible to separate the Sabbath from creation. You can't have Sabbath without creation. So
Mhm.
immediately when you spoke of creation, this Sabbath thing came to mind. I said, no, I gotta ask this. So what can you say about it in African traditional religion and the Bible?
Yes. So we find that Testament Sabbath is a very strong concept that the Bible mentions again and again, particularly in the Old Testament. It's strongest there, right from Genesis chapter 1, going into chapter 2, verse 1 to 3. When God creates and everything like that, whether you're talking about Exodus chapter 20 or Deuteronomy chapter 5, and many other sections like in the book of Leviticus. So the Sabbath, you find, especially like in the prophets, particularly the book of Ezekiel. where you find the Sabbath being mentioned, like, for example, chapter 12, verse 20, chapter 20, verse 20. And throughout, really, the Old Testament is replete with references to the Sabbath, because the Sabbath points us to the Creator and the reason why He is to be worshipped. For example, you look at Psalm 95, which is a call to worship. Psalm 95, come, let us bow down, let us kneel before the Lord God, our Maker, for He is the one who made us. And talks about the mountains, they belong to Him, the seas belong to Him, because He created. Let us bow down and worship. So the fact of God's creatorship is the primary reason why He is worshipped, and why Watson Mbiriri is not worshipped. I didn't create, so there's no reason to worship me. But so the moment you take out creatorship, and the Sabbath being a pointer to creatorship, your worship or your spirituality can get distorted and disoriented easily, and so on. It's all easy. So when you look at this, then when you come into African traditional religions, it's quite interesting to note that Africa is the highest of Sabbath keepers of any people group in the world.
Oh,
Africa has the highest concentration of Sabbath keepers. Let me begin by mentioning, for example, that you go into South Africa, the church that was started by Isaiah Shembe, the largest African traditional religion church among the Zulu people. This church was started in 1910, and it is a church that has a membership estimated at 4 million people in South Africa. 4 million.
Wow.
Okay, and it's a church that maybe I'll come to that point. Still in South Africa, there is International Pentecostal Holiness Church, started by Frederick Modise, 1935, IPC. So this church, with a membership estimated at 3 million in South Africa. So you take these two churches together, you're almost approaching half the membership of the Adventist Church worldwide. You know, and we are just in South Africa. And they are not the only Sabbath keeping churches in South Africa. They are not the only ones. These are the bigger ones. Okay. You
I
come
had
into
no
Zimbabwe.
idea.
Yeah. You come into Zimbabwe, then you have got the bigger churches that were started in 1935, like, for example, by Joan Marange. You have got one by Joan Masowe, who preached across the continent of Africa, actually. Then you've got, for example, the one by Paul Mwaja. Actually, he lives in this same neighborhood that I'm in right now. And he's about 100 years old now. Paul Mwaja, the founder of this other church. And each one of these churches has a membership of about 1 million. You know, these are massive churches, massive. So, and they're not the only Sabbath keeping churches, African churches in Zimbabwe. These are the bigger ones. Then you go into Zambia, you go into different countries, and so on and so on. So what you will then find is that the largest and oldest African initiated churches have this thing in common. They are all Sabbath keeping.
Wow.
So, which is quite interesting. And then we leave that aside. When we go into, for example, into Ghana, among the Ashantis, that's where you find the Sabbath being traditionally observed without any reference to the Bible. Without any reference to the Bible. They have kept the Sabbath for generations before they even knew there was a Bible anywhere in the world. The Bible found them keeping the Sabbath. And on the exact day that it is supposed to be kept. So, as you know, that in their culture, a child is named according to your first name becomes the day of the week on which you are born, and so on. And one of the names, I think in Ghana, if I get it right, among the accounts is Onyame Kwame, one of the attributive names for God, God of Sabbath, God Onyame Kwame, Onyame God, Kwame Sabbath. And when you have someone like Kwame Nkrumah, the name is already telling you that the boy was born on a Sabbath. You see? And when missionaries from different churches went into Ghana talking about Sunday observance, the people were shocked. Which God is this one who is
Mm.
worshipped on Sunday? Because the one who created is worshipped on Sabbath. And this became one of the reasons why the Adventist Church in all West Africa is strongest in Ghana. Because
Okay.
when Adventist missionaries later reached Ghana, those Ghanaians were surprised to find that, oh, Sabbath is also mentioned in the Bible. And it really resonated with what they do in their African traditional religion. So you find that the Sabbath is very strong in African traditional religions, very strong. And maybe I'll also mention this, that in Zimbabwe,
Mm.
there are scholars who argue, like for example, Patisanyati and others, who argue for the fact that the kingdom of Zimbabwe, which was a Sabbath-keeping kingdom, which was also an amphictony, which means it was based on a 12-tribe system, just like Israel.
Oh.
And with the Lembas, who are the black Jews here, and some studies have been done by geneticists on them, and they've been studied quite a lot. And they believe they originated in Israel and they came over here, and also in other parts of Africa. But we have them here in the southern part of Zimbabwe, especially, and they keep an object which they call Ngoma Lungundu. Ngoma Lungundu is an equivalent of the Ark of the Covenant,
Phew.
all right, which they keep. And this is a community that keeps the Sabbath. Outside of the others that I already mentioned, these other churches, this is traditionally they keep the Sabbath. So you find that the Sabbath is so strong in African traditional religions. So sorry, I didn't finish.
Mm.
When I was talking about the ancient kingdom of Zimbabwe, we have here in Zimbabwe a day that we call Chisi. Chisi is one day in the week when no hard work is supposed to be done. People don't go into the fields and things like that.
Wow.
Whatever you do, you're just at your homestead. You don't go into the fields throughout Zimbabwe. Chisi, and scholars argue that this is actually coming from an ancient practice of Sabbath observance in
Mm.
the kingdom of Zimbabwe. And
Mm.
as pastors, we actually use that to introduce Sabbath when doing evangelistic campaigns.
Wow.
That Sabbath is just Chisi. This is Chisi from God. And people connect immediately because they know what Chisi is and its value. And you are not supposed to desecrate Chisi, you see,
Wow.
which is like Sabbath. So you find the Sabbath is very strong in African traditional religions.
Wow. I've heard a lot that I have not heard before, and a lot. I recognize Onyankopon Kwame, but every other thing you mentioned, I had no idea. I'm realizing now how vast this actually is, and the numbers you've added of these churches in the 20th and 19th century. I had no idea of all of this. Um, I will
Mhm.
definitely ask whenever you do have the time, just to give me the certain sources, so that in the second edition I can add it to it. But wow, that's interesting. There are people who say that it is a
Yeah, so
result.
that's while you're at that, I will have to look for, because I did a paper talking about the Sabbath as a missiological bridge, a case for the church in Southern Africa. I
Oh,
did a paper on that, and yeah, that would be. I think that can be handy because it gives you also the references, the sources, and everything like
how
that.
come
So
I've
yes,
never
I'll
I've
share with
never
you.
had I've never seen this paper? How is that possible? But
Yes, it's
even
there. I did a
even
paper.
Dr. Marfo, he has written something on the Akan Sabbath observance. I only came across it when I was doing research to write the book. That's the only time I came across it.
Yes,
And then there's
yes,
also Robert Osei Bonsu. He's now the
yes,
president for WAD. He has also written something. Um,
yes. I'm aware of their papers. Yes.
okay. I would love to get
Hmm.
yours also. And yeah, I definitely need to get it because, but you know, there are people who say, I don't believe it, but, and I want to test the arguments I use to rebuttal it with you. And before I do that, we are now into this for an hour and 11 minutes. Um,
Mhm.
is there, I don't know, I don't want to, I can go on and on. I have a lot of questions. I'm learning a lot, and I also want to take this opportunity to present certain ideas I have and hear your opinion on it. Um, so how much time do you give me? Um, how much time do I have
Um,
left?
okay, I think 25 minutes will be okay.
Okay. Let me just plug my laptop quickly.
That's right. I also need to plug my phone. I'm using my phone at the
No,
moment.
go ahead and plug.
It's okay. That's all right.
Yes. So, can I go on or you want to settle down first?
Yes, 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 yes. You can go on.
Okay, so there are people who say that Sabbath observance in African traditional religions is the result of Jewish influence. Um, they say it's the result of Jewish influence. And for example, we have the Lemba. The Lemba have always argued that they are descendants of Israelites. And you mentioned that research has been done. I also came across a research from the American government, and it had to do with DNA tests. They were testing something. It was the Genome Project. And as they did tests on the Lembas, they realized that they have connections with the, what do you call them? With the Aaron, with Aaron's descendants in Israel. Um, and then you also have the Falasha in Ethiopia. They observe the Sabbath. And then we know the Sephardic Jews, for example. The Sephardic Jews came from Italy, then Yemen, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Western Europe, and then Northern Africa. So clearly there are people groups in Africa that are Jews, and they have mixed African traditional religion with Judaism. And then there are some who it seems that they were influenced by the presence of these Jewish people in Africa. So they adopted things like, for example, the Ten Commandments and all of these other elements. Now, the second part is this. Um, we have, for example, Onyankopon Kwame. My argument to this, and this is where I want to hear your opinion, is that for some, yes, the Lemba, the Falasha, clearly there was some sort of syncretism between African traditional religion and Judaism. But people like the Akan, where the concept of God is associated with the deity. For example, he who was born on Saturday, they refer to the creator
Mhm,
as such.
mhm,
Um, if this was a result of Jewish influence, then the Jews probably gave us the names and attributes for our deities. And that's why I don't believe that every Sabbath observance is a result of Jewish influence, because it would imply that wherever in Africa we find Sabbath observance, it is, if it is a result of Jewish influence and the concept of the Sabbath is associated with the concept of the name of the Creator, is associated with the concept of the Creator, then it is more likely that they gave us our theologies of the Supreme Creator. They gave us our theologies of creation, and this is one of the reasons why I reject it. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I reject it. Another one, the last one,
mhm,
is that if we look at the Bible, we can argue that there were Sabbath keepers in the African continent and other continents before the Jews even existed. Because Genesis 9 and 10 you have the sons of Noah who divide the world amongst themselves. Genesis 9 is 8 chapters from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, where the Sabbath is introduced. And the sons of Noah, after the flood, they were the first human beings on earth after the world was formatted. And these sons of Noah had the worldview of Noah. The worldview of Noah was the worldview of Adam. They believed in a supreme creator. They believed in the concept of the Sabbath. Genesis 3:15, they believed in a coming savior, Messiah concept. And so the sons of Noah most likely established African culture, European culture, and Asian culture because, Mizraim, Put, Cush, all these other guys, Canaan, wherever they went, they established those cultures using the worldview and principles that Noah had introduced to them. So it would not be strange that all over the world we find these concepts that Noah had introduced to his sons, because the founders of these cultures after the flood believed in them. So, and the Jews, for example, this is Genesis 9 and 10, the sons of Noah. The Jews, Abraham is called in chapter 12, but the Jewish nation is not even born yet. And then when you go to chapter 16, verse 16, I believe, Ishmael is born. That's many years after there were already people in the world who knew about the Sabbath. And then chapter 17, Isaac is born. And then you have Jacob and all these other guys and the 12 patriarchs. Many, many years later, then they go into Egypt and they leave as 600,000. So if the sons of Noah had the worldview of Noah, they were in Africa and in other parts of the world with the Sabbath concept way, way before any Jew existed. What do you think of this?
I couldn't agree more. I believe, for example, when you look at the accounts, um, this should, I think that would be a reasonable explanation to their Sabbath observance. I think of it as an echo from those ancient times, right from
Mm.
the dawn of history, as residual knowledge and awareness of a God who created and who gave the Sabbath. And so it has been maintained over the years and everything like that. Of course, we've got these groups that associate themselves with Israel, like the Falasha and the Lembas and other groups, even in some parts of West Africa, like Nigeria, and so on. But there are people, for example, people groups, at least one people group that were found deep in the Amazon, totally isolated from civilization as we know it, and they were keeping the Sabbath.
Oh, really?
You know, in a community that does not have literature, they don't read,
Wow.
they don't write, they don't know literature, but observing the Sabbath exactly on the actual day, you
Oh,
know.
who
And
are
there's
they?
a whole I mean, yes. So there's a documentary that was done. I think it's the best documentary I've ever seen on the Sabbath. It's a 5-part series
Really?
documentary. Uh, yes, on the
Oh,
Sabbath.
I've never
I can
seen
send
this.
you a link to this
Please.
5-part series. Yes, it's a 5-part
Wow.
series. And it's very interesting when you go through this and see Sabbath observance in different parts of the world, in places you don't even expect.
Wow.
Like these guys in the Amazon, they blew me away, you know,
Wow.
without any contact with civilization as we know it. And so this would explain how, if, for example, among the Akans and other communities in Africa, you would have this and being observed and being so important and significant. And let me also quickly add that sometimes we tend to overlook also the fact that many of these things that we read about in the Bible did take place in Africa. For
Yes.
example, the giving of the Ten Commandments themselves was done in Africa. Mount Sinai is still in Africa.
Mm.
These things did not happen in Europe. They didn't happen in America. They happened in Africa. Anyone who's going to climb Mount Sinai, as it is traditionally known and understood, it is in Egypt. You see, um, and so I would want to think that Africa has had a direct and a personal experience with God. You'll find some of the pharaohs. Of course, everyone knows that we've got pyramids in Egypt, but what most people may not know is that Sudan has more pyramids than
Yeah.
Egypt.
Yeah.
And many of the pharaohs of the Egyptian empires were Sudanese, or they were actually crowned in Sudan, and so
Oh.
on. And you've got some of them, at least one was mentioned in the Old Testament, was called Tehaka, all
Mm.
right, who's mentioned right there. So what you would find is Africa does not have this interaction with God only through the influence of missionaries, but Africa has had a direct interaction with God. The echoes from Mount Sinai, when God spoke and thundered, they have echoed through the generations of Africa's existence. And so you find Moses' wife was, a Cushite and everything
Mm.
like that. His father-in-law would then have to have been a Cushite. And the Bible tells us that he was a priest of the Most High God.
Mm.
You know, you would go
Mm.
so far as to give advice to Moses and tell him that the way you're running this thing is not correct. You need to do it like this, like this. Moses, who spoke to God face to face, but he had to take advice from this man, a priest of the Most High God, who was a resident in the Sinai area. And so you find that. So my point is, Africa has her own experience with God. Like, for example, I referred to the book of Amos, chapter 9, where God asks Israelites a rhetorical question and says, "Are you not like Cushites to me? Are you not just the same as the?" Which means God has this direct interaction with Africa. And then he says, "I brought the Philistines from Kefta, and I brought the Arameans from Kir." Your exodus as Israelites is not the exodus. It's only one of many that I have done. You see? So God has had his own interactions. And we look in Acts chapter 17, verse 27, where Paul says that God is not far from any one of us. He has
Mm.
made all nations of one blood and has given us times and boundaries of where we live, but so that we may seek after him, although he is not far from any of us. So God has been very close to his people throughout. So to think that it's Jewish influence, yes, there could be some Jewish influence, but over and above or outside of that, Africa has an own unique experience with this God. Many of the events that the Old Testament records happened in association and in interaction, direct interaction with Africa. So Africa does not have second-hand knowledge of God. It is actually first-hand. And there are many people who even argue that Christianity should be considered an indigenous religion of Africa, because Jesus was here just the other day and everything like that. There are many people who actually argue that Christianity should be considered an indigenous religion of Africa. You see?
Wow.
And so Africa has her own first-hand experience with God, which is not second-hand. It is a first-hand experience.
Wow. Wow. I think that's a beautiful note to end the discussion. Let me just add this last, let me write it down. This suggestion as Christianity as what terminology did you use? That Christianity should be
That
considered an
Christianity
indigenous.
should be, you can be argued to be an indigenous religion of Africa,
Okay.
because as Christianity was being formed, you talk about the Ethiopian eunuch being baptized right at the beginning of the whole thing. Jesus was here. He never visited some of these places where we say that this is a European thing. He never went to Europe, but
Mm.
he was here in Africa. You
Mhm.
see? So how the first 5 books of the Bible were written by someone who was coming from Africa. For all intents and purposes, ethnically, those Israelites, of course, they were Israelites, but having lived in Africa for 450 years, come on, those guys
They
were
were
Africans.
Africans. They were
All the
African.
passports were African.
Even the way they behave, the way the everything, they behave like Africans.
It was African. That's why they were crying for all this garlic and everything like that and so on. And the first sanctuary to be built was built on the tabernacle.
Yes.
It was built on African soil, using African materials, using African acacia trees, African goats, African gold. It was in Africa. It was not done on other continents. So Africa has their own first-hand experience with God. It's not second-hand. So people get confused when they think about the 19th century project of, missionary outreach to the world, and David
Mm,
Livingstone and Robert Moffat and all these guys who did wonderful work. And then they think that this is when Africa was being introduced to the God of the Bible. No,
mm,
wrong answer. Uh, I think the oldest church building in the world is in Ethiopia.
yes.
You know, in Ethiopia, right here on this continent. And there are so many reasons why many people believe Christianity should be considered an indigenous religion of Africa. It's not
Wow.
something that was, brought the other day. It was always here, right from the beginning of the Christian era. It was always here, Christianity. And one of the men who helped Jesus on the cross, he was Simon from Cyrene, that is in Libya
Mm,
there,
mm,
right at Calvary. We're
mm,
eyewitnesses to the Savior hanging to save the world. We were not told about it, we witnessed it.
mm.
So, for sure, it is an indigenous religion of Africa.
Wow, powerful. That's a beautiful way to end. I'm happy we did this. I can tell that I've learned a lot, and I have more for the second edition of my book. African traditional religion isn't something I have always been interested in, but after studying the Bible and ancient Near East, I got to a point where I said to myself, I am studying so much about these other cultures that I know very little about mine. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, and I'm beginning to
Yeah,
appreciate it more.
it's all unfortunate Dr. Choto couldn't join, but
Mm,
I hope we make another meeting,
we will.
because it really goes deep when it
We
comes
will.
to this
No,
subject.
we
Yeah,
have to.
very deep.
We have to. And
Yes.
I'm starting again. It's been a while since I've done this. It's something I learned a lot from. And I also try to test out certain ideas I have. And this is just, it's a learning opportunity for me. And I know that it can also be for a lot of people. And one thing, why did I really wanted you to participate in this? When we were at IAS, the way you would talk about African traditional religion, um, it created this interest in me. And today I have this book. I'm reading more about it. It's There's just so much out there, and there's a lot to be proud of as an African. And so I really appreciate your ministry
Thank
and
you so much.
this no taking part in this discussion. I want to have you on for another discussion on we'll find, according to your schedule, on Elijah's non-compliance. I was at the defense. I enjoyed the defense. When you discuss Jonah and Elijah non-compliance, and I still see a lot of people don't get it. Um,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, a lot of people, they share. How do I put this? The reasons they give for Jonah not going to Nineveh is very. I thank God I
Yes.
was there that day. I thank God. And I really wanted us to discuss that, your dissertation in detail. And then another one with the doctor that was supposed to be here, and also one just with him, because I'm also interested in anthropology. And yes, but anyways, I would like to, you might have last words. How would you like us to end? We started with how would you like us to start? I want us to end with how would you like us to end?
Um, I would want to end by saying that it is very important that we take time to study the Bible, the Old Testament, and to study it in depth. And as Christians in Africa, or believers, or pastors, or elders, or young people, it's also important to take time to study the African traditional religion. because without that, we run risks of getting into syncretism and everything like that. Um, it is very important. And once we understand it, it can actually help us appreciate the Bible better and
Mm,
communicate the gospel more effectively
mm,
to people who are steeped in African traditional religions. There are many other things that we didn't even get to talk about. For example, the issue of like scapegoats. Like here in
mm.
Zimbabwe, traditionally that's a very common thing. So when I read about it in the Old Testament, it's something that I grew up seeing in my village,
Wow.
being done in the village.
Wow.
And so when you read it in the Old Testament, you say, oh yeah, yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I know that. Because so it's really very important to look at this. When we don't, when we are shallow in both areas, we easily confuse ourselves, and then we can become even easy target by
Mm.
people who are propagating ideas that we have to throw away the Bible because it was brought by missionaries the other day. No, we wrote it, you know? Yeah. And so you can't tell us that about. So you easily get confused, and then you think that someone is really talking sense. They're not talking any sense. It's important to understand the fact information. It then grounds us and deepens our faith. We are grounded. We're not blown about by every wind of doctrine, but we then have this weight, this gravitas, which enables us to stand. And yes, let's study. And that's how we grow. And let's keep on having conversations. It's always important. So I really enjoyed the session, and blessings to everybody. Thank you so much, Pastor Ayers. I don't know when I'm going to get a copy of that book, but as soon as I can get my hands on it, I definitely want to devour, so we can interact and share, so
Mm.
that yeah, I'll be getting my copy soon.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for
Yes,
participating. And once again, I've learned a lot. And I'm really grateful for the time. I know you had a busy Sabbath, as usual. So thank you very much for participating. May God bless and greetings to the family.
thank you so much. Blessings to you too,
Sure.
and
Sure.
have a great week ahead. And to everybody, God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. Shalom, Pastor.
Shalom alaikum.
All right. That was a good discussion. As usual, um, Dr. Watson Biriri is he always surprises me with something new, something I never expected. As I mentioned in this discussion, I remember in the Philippines we were having potluck, and I know he was there. Dr. Clifford Sibanda was also there, and I'm going to also have Dr. Sibanda join us sometime. Dr. Sibanda did the foreword for my book, and they began to discuss about the Sabbath, and I overheard it. Um, and it was at first when I heard it, I was surprised that we have this concept of of Sabbath in African traditional religion. So I decided to do more research on it. But at the time, I didn't really invest a lot of time into it. It is only in the past years that I have done that. And in my book, chapter 4, I demonstrate how the Sabbath is present in the north, south, west, and east of Africa. And I posit that it could possibly also be present in Central Africa. So, if you would like to read about that, order the book. It is you can order through www.aias, which is my first name, and then abc.org. And when you enter the website, you will be led to several platforms where you can order it either paperback or digital copy. Um, so I encourage you to look at it if you're interested in African traditional religions, or if you want to verify if the accusations that recent militant racist I call them racist because their arguments to deny Christianity and the Bible is based on race and ethnicity, not on theological, historical, philosophical consistency and coherence, but rather just simply because it's somehow in the history of Christianity, you come across Europe and all of these other things. So these racist Pan-African movement militants, the ones denying or saying that we should abandon Christianity and the Bible, um, um, if you want to verify if we really should, read the book. Africa has been presented as the cradle of civilization by archaeologists, theologians, scientists. If you want to know more about that, if that is really true, get a copy of the book. Right now, excuse me, I would like to share with you the video of my book, and I'm going to play the video for you. And then after that, I am going to end this session. So let me do that. Let me play it for you. Just bear with me. I started using a new streaming app, and I haven't really gotten the hang of it yet. But you know, practice helps us improve. There are people who say practice makes perfect, but not all the time. Practice doesn't. It just makes you better. You may become really, really good, but practice does not make you perfect. So let me share that video about my upcoming book, and then African traditional religion and the Bible possess concepts on the origin of life that have a deeply rooted sociological impact in Africa, but their shared commonalities are erroneously being interpreted by a religious Pan-Africanism that has raised serious accusations against the Bible. Such antagonism is a retaliation to slavery, colonization, and racist missionary activities in Africa. As a result, so many are asking if we should forsake Christianity and return to African traditional religions. Is the Bible a European invention to enslave Africans? Is it hostile to African religions? Is Africa really the cradle of civilization? Are Africans truly the first inventors? Several answers have been given, but most have been doubtful, dangerous, and disappointing. They have only contributed to more ignorance and agnosticism on the subject matter. I believe it is because some are misinformed, others are uninformed, and many informed individuals misinterpret and misapply credible information. Conversely, some are correctly dealing with this issue. This last group of informed and balanced individuals is not my primary focus. My primary focus in this book is to enlighten the misinformed and challenge several of the extreme views on the subject matter that continue to be promoted, such as the notion that the Bible and Christianity should be made African or forsaken. Finally, the reason why I have entitled this book, The Biblical Creator Dressed in African Attire, and why the last chapter is a call for Africans to return to their roots, can only be fully grasped after one embarks on the journey of reading the book. In so doing, you join me in a historical adventure, because when I began, I did so without knowing where it would take me or what I would find. Each chapter is a step I took forward, and at the end, I realized that the path that I had undertaken led me to the beginning of the Bible. All right, so that's the video. Visit the website www.aiasabc.org. May God bless you all. See you next time.